Hello, this is Adam Williams, and you are listening to Retail Redeveloped. Thank you so much for joining me today. I was just asked what number episode this is, and it made me curious. I think I'm in the 60s now, but I need to go back and look at it. And I just want to say thank you to everybody that listens to this show. It's so much fun. I get to meet so many different people, and I really appreciate everybody listening. So if you listen to the show regularly, this is going to be very, very, very different. If you don't listen to the show regularly, I'm glad you picked this one if you're in the real estate business, because this is going to be a very, very different podcast than what you're used to. I'm being joined right now by Ryan Wishart. He's an experienced psychotherapist and coach with a demonstrated history of working in the mental health care industry. Skilled in coaching services, relationship counseling, coaching, therapy for men's issues, and therapy for addiction. He provides coaching services for clients looking for a more solution-focused approach to their issues. So, why in the hell am I sitting here talking to Ryan? I'm assuming at least someone is asking them that listens to this podcast. So I met Ryan over the holidays at a cocktail party, and it's your typical cocktail conversation of, hey, what's your name? What do you do? Yada, yada, yada. I learned about what Ryan does for work. He learned about what I do for work, which is commercial real estate, brokerage, development, things like that. And his eyes lit up. And Ryan looks at me and says, that is a huge part of my business. In fact, it's the number one occupation of my clients. And obviously, I've always probably known I needed some therapy, but I've never gotten any therapy. But it was so interesting to me to hear that it was an overwhelming majority of Ryan's business. So I followed up with Ryan, asked him if he would be so kind to just sit down with me and explain to me kind of what the general themes are, why our breed is in need or susceptible to benefiting from therapy. And so, Ryan, thank you so much for sitting down with me and agreeing to sit down with me and just talk this out with me.
Oh, you're so welcome, man. Thanks for the invitation. Honored to be here. Been listening to some episodes, and it's a great podcast, so this will be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. So most of my podcasts, there's a like a capitalist pig kind of theme running through them, right?
I've noticed.
It's like how do we profit from real estate? What does the future look like in real estate? What is retail? What is the cutting edge? Mm-hmm. We couldn't get any farther from that today.
That's right, man.
But before you crack my head open and look inside and share with us kind of some of your knowledge, would you just sit and tell people kind of how you got started? Tell me a little bit how you became sitting in the chair in front of me. We're in your office. I'm laying on the couch right now. Just walk me through the why behind your chair and you sitting there.
You got it, man. Well, there's obviously a long story and a complicated story that's based in lots of family reasons and personal experiences, but the kind of high arching storyline here is after I graduated from undergrad, I volunteered for a couple of years in Nashville, Tennessee, and I ended up working with people coming out of prison. And I was sort of in that floating space after undergrad of, do I want to do law school? What do I want to do? And kind of working with folks coming out of prison. And I mean, counseling's probably too strong a word in terms of what I was doing for them. A lot of job training, helping them find houses and stuff like that. All of a sudden, it's sort of like, I'm really enjoying this aspect of work, getting people's stories. I'm sort of a nosy person, a curious person by nature, so that sort of fits my personality. And on another level, I had an aunt who was a therapist in Chicago for 30 years, so that was always sort of like on your mind as a kid, like that is a profession people go into, right? So that was always kind of logged back there. And in kind of doing that work for a few years, that really solidified a path for me. Where were my skills? Where were my interests? And I decided to go to grad school and went to the University of Connecticut and did that for a few years and worked in New Haven for a couple years after that. Well, maybe a year after that. And my wife was at grad school at LSU, so we were doing long distance at the time. And we wanted to find a place that was not in Connecticut for lots of complicated reasons and not in Louisiana for other reasons. So we said, let's figure it right in the middle. So we started looking for jobs. And, kind of East Coast, Raleigh, Richmond, Charles. If the right job had been along, I'd be in any of those cities, but the right jobs kind of popped up in Charlotte. So we've been here about 10 years. And, like a lot of young therapists, I started working for a nonprofit and an agency and slowly built up the private practice on the side. This was always the goal. Even before grad school, I wanted to be in my own office, working for myself, seeing the type of clients I want to see. And you build and you build and you build, just like any business, just like your business. And here I am, 7, 8 years later, and full-time private practice here on East Boulevard. That's the high level for you.
So before we dive into real estate specific, what would you consider the biggest surprise that you've encountered now that you've been doing this for a while, and what would you consider the biggest kind of like myth or misconception about therapy?
About therapy in general? Yeah. Well, I think the thing that surprised me the most, and this sounds very selfish on some level, but I really believe, I'm in my mid-30s now, something like 60% of my psychological development as a human being is because of the job I do. Because for 30 hours a week, I sit in this room and I talk to clients about deep, real, interesting, complex issues. And that is pretty countercultural, right? In America, where that space, that is the sea I swim in 24/7, right? It's the energy I bring home. Many of my friends, the party we met at was at a psychologist's house, right? These are my people. This is what we talk about. And I think that surprised me. I did not anticipate how much I would grow and change through this process of learning from my clients and being inspired and challenging notions and admitting I don't know things. And that's been unbelievably satisfying. So that's kind of a fun surprise. Biggest misconception of therapy? I'm sort of from a certain generation of therapists, I think. I'm in my mid-30s, I mentioned. And I think the market bias, take this, I don't have any research on this, but the market bias of psychology or therapy has really changed over the years. And I think way, way, way back in the day, obviously it was like highly stigmatized. You go to therapy, you're crazy. You go to therapy, you're weak, whatever. And then I think it shifted a little bit to therapy became a luxury service. And there's huge issues systemically in terms of people's access to mental health care, right? That's a big problem. But it kind of became a luxury service, right? Certain people could afford it. Obviously, not all insurances covered it until kind of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, made that mandatory. And now I think the market bias has shifted a little bit to therapy is now maintenance, right? Or many people view therapy as maintenance. Similarly to going to the gym, going to your preventative care appointments with your doc, meditating, right? If I can be...
That's so funny that you just said that.
Yeah.
Because as you would maybe guess, I'm a little bit of a nerd about podcasts, and I love kind of the how you built this and like the entrepreneur podcast. And, I love Joe Rogan. I love Tim Ferriss. I love a lot of podcasts that focus people that are highly effective at what they do.
Totally.
And when you were sitting there talking about kind of the maintenance aspect of therapy, it literally made me think about meditating. And I'm here to tell you, as somebody that nerds out about people that are highly effective at what they do, one of the main few themes that run through these highly effective, accomplished people is meditation. And I have never meditated. I don't know anything about the practice, but it's interesting that meditation and therapy are things that I keep hearing about from highly effective people.
Yeah, I mean, it is, I have this joke I tell all my clients that if every client when they started with me signed a contract that they would meditate daily, exercise regularly, and get a good night's sleep consistently, and have good relationships, I would have no clients within 6 months. And I sort of am joking with that, but this idea that stuff is absolutely transformative because there are so few reflective spaces built in our society. We need to carve them out. And I feel very lucky that therapy, and I go to therapy, right? I have a therapist. I'll be seeing her next week. It's the best money I probably spend in my life. This idea that I need to intentionally carve out aspects or situations where there's silence, where there's reflection, where there's thoughtfulness in a way that's very intentional. Now, meditation is certainly a way to do that. Therapy is a way to do that. Prayer, I'm sure, for people. And nature. You were telling me riding your bike is a way for you to do that, Adam. But we got to make that happen because in the world we live in, and I sound like an old person here, right? But just social media, the way we're bombarded with information, busyness.
Our brains were not built for this.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. In psychology, we call it a supernormal stimulus, that the amount of stimulation that comes into our brain far exceeds what's required to get shit done or be successful. And it's like absolutely bombarding us. And there's consequences to that, as we will get into, I'm sure, in certain professions more than others, maybe.
Right. And I will tell you that my kind of headspace, and I've thought about trying to create a meditation practice. I love reading is that for me. I love just shutting the rest of my brain off, shutting my phone off and reading.
Great.
Skiing, which I just got back from a ski trip. That's something that you have to focus on very, very carefully, and you can't be thinking about everything else while you're doing it.
That's right.
The other one, and sounds like an insane therapy, is driving race cars. For me, is like an insanely therapeutic experience.
So you need some adrenaline, huh?
Yeah, for some reason, adrenaline to me is calming.
Yeah.
But some of it is the requirement to focus only on one thing.
That's right.
And focus on nothing else.
That's right.
For even 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes at a time, which I think speaks to what you're talking about the amount that we're just constantly bombarded.
Nonstop.
And all right, so let's move in a little bit to real estate, right? Because that's obviously why we're here, and that's what people, if they're listening to this, they probably want to hear about, because that's a big part of my audience.
Yep.
I would say, I want to start the conversation, right? I would say that my normal day, I am expected to focus on many, many things at once. Some of that is for my own choosing. Some of that is the job. Some of that is the fact that I have a massive wall of monitors on my computer, and I can multitask doing a lot of things at once. But I think it speaks to that kind of bombardment of information that you're talking about. Like, we're expected to do 4 things at once, and we're expected to be on all the time. Like, I very routinely take phone calls at 8 o'clock at night, 7 o'clock in the morning, on weekends. Our business doesn't really stop, and there's certainly a notion out there that commercial real estate brokers, especially, do all their work on the golf course with a beer in one hand and a cigar in the other, and that's the normal. That's not the way I operate. I'm sure people are very successful to do that, but let's get into a little bit of why you think that commercial real estate people in general represent such a disproportionate amount of your client base. And do you see certain things that kind of are a consistent trigger, or walk me through kind of why the underlying aspects of why you think that we're susceptible to benefiting from therapy? Yeah,
totally, man. I have a follow-up question for you real quick. When you said you start a day on the call, or you end the day on a call, right, and you have to be on, and I'd imagine that probably means, Adam, that's not just you taking a call. That's a certain version of Adam Williams that is engaging on that call.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's
Social.
It's not the one that needs to be wrestling with my kid.
There you go.
Or not freaking out that this puppy we got is insane.
You're right.
It's a totally different. The Adam that is on that phone has a much sharper edge to him than the Adam that should be, tossing his 5-year-old around.
100%, man. Yeah, that's a very insightful thought, right? So I'd just clarify that I'd imagine that's really challenging. So I'll sort of answer one question, then kind of move into a general kind of statement on this. And I told Adam I would sort of just preface this out of, this is an honest statement here. I will not be talking about any specific clients. So if you're a client of Ryan Wishart in the commercial real estate business, you're good. I'm not talking about you right now. Okay, that being said, it's kind of interesting, right? And I told Adam over at this Hanukkah party that we met at, the highest percentage of one kind of business of all my clients is commercial real estate people. And that doesn't really make sense, right, in terms of just numbers in Charlotte, right? You would expect it to be finance or something like that. But that ends up being the case. And I think there's a couple reasons why my practice specifically has so many, right? Number one, I think, is word of mouth. And that's 90% of any business, maybe on some level, that you work with some people, you did good work, hopefully, and maybe they gave your number to other people. Okay, so that's part of it.
But I would say, and again, this is total generalization.
Go for it.
I don't know the first freaking thing about any of this, but in my mind, and you talked about the stigmatization of therapy. In my mind, the commercial real estate men, especially that I know, right? And I don't know what your percentage is.
All guys.
Women.
All guys.
So I would think that they wouldn't offer that up. The guys that I know are all like alpha
ego,
like all like I've got to have the newest Ferragamo loafers, and I've got to have the newest BMW, and
right.
it's not a group. I can't see a group sitting around being like, oh man, killed my therapy session this week. Like really had a breakthrough. You know, was so vulnerable. Like I just can't see that in my mind. So I don't know if it is word of mouth. Maybe it is. I have no idea. But I'm thinking about. I know a ton of commercial real estate people in town, and it's hard for me to think that it's really that much word of mouth.
Yeah, and maybe that's encouraging on some level, Adam, right? Like maybe that's shifting. Maybe that's shifting because I always ask clients, how'd you get my number? And often, so and so worked with you, thinks you did a good job. I could do something similar.
There has to be some growth there. That's all.
So there's something there, right? And even if that's over a beer with just a buddy, right? They might not sort of be proselytizing that to the office, right? Because there's vulnerability there. I wouldn't suggest people do that in general. But yeah, I do think in quiet moments where you see someone struggling. I mean, and Adam, like you're, and I could be talking about commercial real estate. We could also be talking about certain branches of finance here. We could be talking about other professions, right? But sales, for instance, like those jobs are stressful jobs, right? Those jobs require an awful lot. Not that a teacher doesn't or a therapist. I'm not comparing directly, but if we're speaking in sort of general here, we have an industry, right? And you kind of are talking about some of those personality characteristics. Maybe, right? Hard-charging people, typically type A's, very intense, very social, very smart, very street smart, very savvy. And that's wonderful, right? I'd imagine when you're hiring at a company, you're sort of looking for, I'm making this up, former athletes or people who are curious and people who want to learn, right? There's like probably certain personality characteristics that do better. I don't know if that's true. You can tell me if I'm wrong. But there can be consequences sometimes to that. And this is my theory, Adam, and I really want to hear your thoughts on this because I'm not even sure I believe this theory, but I've been kicking this around. I bring this up to clients and they generally agree with it. And I'll kind of talk about myself first, and I'm not comparing my job to your job, right? So don't hear that. But there is, at the end of my day, if I see 6 clients, 7 clients, 8 clients, whatever's going on there, my social quota, and my social quota is pretty high. I'm like a pretty outgoing human being, is absolutely filled, okay? That I get in a different way. There are aspects of my job where I get to be incredibly creative. There are aspects of my job where I get to dig deep and reflect, where I feel like I've really helped someone, right? And my shoulders are a little broader after those sessions, and I feel pretty good about that. And that is wonderful, right? I really like my job, if you can't tell. I really feel lucky. And if those quotas are full, Adam, I need to be very careful of what version of me shows up at home. I've got 2 young kids. I've got a wife. I've got friends. I need to maintain my health. I have family relationships. I have friendships. I have spiritual practices I need to engage in, whatever those things are. Like, I need to be aware. We all need to be aware. This is sort of, I'm kind of talking about your industry too here. Like, if so much of your social quota, emotional quota, stress quota, and some of that's like really good. I'm glad that gets filled up for people. And I think the balance there is what's left at the end of the day. And that very intentional, kind of mindful, I don't know, what are you doing on your commute home to kind of get ready? You mentioned, like, you got kids. Like, what version of dad is there after he just got crushed all day? And not even in a bad way, but just 1,000 meetings, 8 computer screens, 8 billion calls, multitasking nonstop, having to be social, having to take people out, having to plan ahead, having to deal with minutia, and then what's left at the end of the day? And that's an interesting thought. It's an individual sort of thing. But I think that's often where people kind of get jammed up. If we're talking in general in these sort of professions, is that I do think it sort of like wrings people out. How much is left after? And that's a big thing I'm working on with the clients I work with. Because at its most extreme, right, at its most extreme, we can cope with that stress in really negative ways. And we know what those things could be, right? I don't even need to say them, right? Addiction, poor coping skills, whatever. Isolation, right? But can lead to depression, can lead to stress. And yeah, that's not good. That's going to shorten your lifespan. That's going to impact your relationships. But even on a more mild version of that, I mean, and this happens to me. I'll get home, right? I see 8 clients yesterday. I'm home. I've got 2 kids. They're going to be up for a couple hours. I've got a wife who needs a present husband. There's not much left in the tank, man. And so what does that mean for me to be able to what? Focus on self-care, get my head straight, engage in that despite having my quota have been met for the day. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so, it makes a ton of sense.
Okay, so again, I don't know if I believe that fully, but that's my sort of working theory that some of these jobs do meet a lot of human needs, core human needs, which is beautiful. And I don't want it to max out those core needs either, because those need to show up elsewhere.
I think I think that makes a lot of sense, and I'll share a theory with you as well.
Yeah, please.
Because again, when we talked, that's the reason why we're sitting here. I thought about meeting, and I thought about what you told me about the kind of disproportionate percentages. This business, super stressful. We're only as good as our last deal, and even worse than that, I could have just killed it for Jim, but Bob isn't happy.
Yeah.
So Bob is kicking my ass, even though I just hit a home run for Jim.
Wow.
And Larry is over there being like, "Well, I called you 7 hours ago, man. What's
been?
going on? Like, I guess I'm not the prettiest girl at the dance right now, right?" And so I think that so a couple things. One, you're only as good as your last deal, even if that was 30 seconds ago, right? I think that most of the people that have been in the business for more than 6 months are 100% commission, 100% you eat what you kill.
100%. Yeah.
The deal cycles in our business are laughably long, right? They are like, I never find client, fill need, get paid in a month, right? It's
right?
Oh, it can be 2 years. It could be 3 years. They're literally, some of these deals take an insane, and you get into the development world, it could be 10 years, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so you have these massive peaks and these massive valleys.
Because that could fumble any time over the 2 years, right?
So my attorney is getting paid $400 an hour, no matter if the deal closes or not.
Yeah.
My architects are getting paid theirs. My engineers are getting paid theirs. Designers, like the whole food chain is getting paid on an hourly or case by case kind of, get need, fill need kind of case.
Yeah.
We are the last people that get paid.
Yeah.
Right. We get paid when the deal closes. If it dies the 11th hour, sorry for your hard work.
Yep.
Right. Like, I owe you a beer. Right. Like, there's a lot of that. So it has huge peaks and valleys. You get very emotionally involved in deals that can crash at any time.
I'm sure.
And on top of that, I think that everybody talks about the 80-20 rule, right? And in commercial real estate, it's very much 80% of the business is getting done by 20% of the people.
Oh, I see.
So there is, but everybody needs to look successful if they want to go after certain clients.
Sure.
Right. Like it would be, I think, a challenge to show up with a car with a big dent in the side and a ripped seat and holes on the top of your shoes. Right.
Yeah.
Holes at the bottom of your shoes are good. That means you're wearing out shoe leather.
You're going for it. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. But so you have this kind of almost obligation to look the part and to act the part.
Yeah.
And there's somebody in your office, in your company, in your, sphere that is just knocking the freaking cover off the ball, because you can make serious money in the commercial real estate space if you're in that 20%. So I think that all of those things combine for a pressure cooker situation, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you add it on to what you mentioned before of just the nature of the business, whether you're making $1 or $1 million, you're going to be exhausted if you're really hustling anyway.
Yeah.
And you add that kind of pressure cooker aspect to it, and I 100% get it.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, man. Yeah, that is unique, right? I mean, I don't know any other professions where it's quite like that.
Is probably there's got to be, if you're selling nuclear reactors, right?
Yeah, I guess so. But there's how many people are selling those, man? Yeah, that's just big, right? That is. I think one thing that's sort of and that stuff, Adam, is very pleasing to the ego. Like a win is very pleasing to the ego, right? This idea that there are these demonstrated successes. And that's beautiful. And I tell all my clients, I would tell this to my kids someday. I'll tell this to myself. As human beings, we need to be ambitious. You need to go get it. Like, go work your ass off. That is beautiful and important. And if you can connect that on a high level to your why, your family, taking care of your kid, like, that is amazing. And so I have no issue with any of those things. For some people, the only thing I worry about is, are there consequences to that? And there probably always are, right? There's probably consequences to my job on some level. I read something the other day. I don't know if this is like a peer-reviewed journal or something, but it was talking about how flight attendants have like high depression rates because they always have to be happy. right? This idea that like you can't be a flight attendant and just show up and be like, hell, I'm just not feeling it.
On American Airlines.
Maybe you can, yeah. United
I was
too.
on Delta last week, and they were the nicest people ever. But
Yeah.
I fly American 99%
Maybe
of the time.
not.
I'm like, wait a minute. It's like going to Chick-fil-A or McDonald's, man. I don't know what's going on.
Well, maybe that's healthy. They'll be less depressed if they can show their authentic feelings, right? Like, I'm just not feeling it today.
Freaking peanuts or what, dude? Just spit it out.
And I've got a job like that too on some level, right? Like, people expect Ryan Wishart to be present, engaged, awake, curious, remembering the things they told them. They can't. And again, I have a life, right? I have suffering. I have highs and lows. But like, Ryan Wishart can't just show up and say, man, I'm just not feeling it today. Let's just like hang out. No, I need to like turn it on. And that's beautiful. And I'm glad I can do that. But I'm just sort of acknowledging the fact that could there be consequences for some people? Because it's not binary, Adam. And we always get stuck in this. I'm either type A, eat what I kill, go for it, or you're telling me to focus on self-care and I'm a baby, or I'm a wimp, or there's like stronger words we can use there, right? In terms of like, particularly for guys, like the identity stuff there. And I try to tell people, you don't have to choose those two things. I haven't had to choose. And again, I'm not comparing my job to your job, but you don't have to choose, Adam, right? You can be ambitious and get it and go for it and grind and hustle and be a present dad and be a present husband and be healthy and be engaged in your family relationships. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. So what would you consider, and again, I almost think of this podcast as like a public service announcement, right?
Yeah.
Like I want, it really struck a chord with me when you mentioned that, because I hate to think that these people that I'm shaking hands with and talking about, the Panthers game and all this stuff, and they're putting on a happy face and they're struggling, right?
Yeah.
Because I've been insanely lucky in this business. I'm crazy passionate about it. I've been able to be successful at it. All of these things I feel extremely lucky, and to think that there's other people that I think are on top of the world and are really struggling, that doesn't make me feel good, right? So what would be, if somebody's listening to this out there, what would you consider kind of warning signs like, hey, listen, man, like you might want to talk to somebody, like whether it's Ryan or whether it's a priest or like whatever. Like,
totally.
What would you say? We all know if you don't come out of your room and it's hard for you to get out of bed and you're knocking back Jack Daniels on the regular, probably those are big warning signs. But let's back it up to somebody that maybe just
more mild.
Yeah, like what should someone like recognize in themselves and be honest with themselves and say, you know what? Like I should probably think about that.
Yeah, and I think it's case by case, individual, and I'll also be clear, Adam. The 99% of my clients, regardless of like what industry they're in, are me, are you, right? Very high functioning professionals, right? I mentioned maintenance before, like very much take that kind of. I've been into therapy before. It's really helpful. I have some mild anxiety, mild depression, need some work stuff. I've been drinking a little bit too much. Whatever those examples are, I do a lot of couples therapy. So, maybe there's some issues going on there. But in general, the vast majority of my caseload are not people who are in absolute mental health crises, right? So I think we're talking about the same sort of people here of like, these are not necessarily the people who haven't shown up to work for 6 months because they've developed an alcohol use disorder or something like that. But these are people who are like, okay, something doesn't feel right. And I give people a lot of credit. Right? Because it takes a lot of honesty with oneself. Freud said self-awareness, man.
Absolutely.
I mean, Freud said the key to emotional health is having no secrets. And I don't necessarily mean like with your friends, but like with yourself. Like really looking, and I think that's what it is, that case-by-case situation. When I actively assess my life right now, are there consequences? Are there issues? Is this impairing anything? I think a very easy way for some people to do that is to judge the quality of their relationships. Now, not everyone's married and things like that, but if you have a partner, if you have a spouse, I mean, checking in with them, where are we at, honey? How are we doing? We've seemed off. Or this really like honest evaluation of yourself of, how am I feeling? Again, we're not always going to be happy. Jobs are hard. Life can be hard at times, right? We're not looking for happiness, but do I feel balanced? Do I feel content? Can I absorb the bad days? Now, bad days are absolutely devastating in your industry, but you got to be able to absorb them at some level, right? It can't absolutely crush you. You can't turn to negative coping skills, right? You're going to make the problem worse. right? So I think the first thing to do is actively sort of be assessing, honestly, with no secrets, what's the quality of my life right now? What is it? And that doesn't mean you have to switch professions. That doesn't mean you have to stop going for it. But that means you might have to tweak some things here and there, sand off some edges. I always tell my clients, I'm not looking to change your life or change your job. But you got to sand off some edges if you're that irritable with your wife. Made up example. If you're that stressed on Sunday because you have to go into the office on Monday and it's ruining your weekend. If you are drinking a couple too many drinks the night before work, right? If it's hard to absorb those losses and it's impacting your relationships. I mean, obviously there's more extreme examples of things you'd want to worry about, right? I'm having panic attacks, which happens in your industry, right? Big deal falls through. This is super stressful, giant presentation, panic. Yeah, you should probably go talk to somebody. You should probably go talk to somebody. My marriage isn't going well. Is that because of work? Well, I don't know about that, but that's something you need to address, right? And I often think a great way to do that is to be, again, it's not binary, it's not black or white. You can do this job and be successful, and I'm just going to use spouse as an example. We could be talking about anything here, and you can be a good spouse. But the way you're going to have to do that is communicating with your spouse of where's the balance for us as a family. When do I need you home? What version of you do I need when you are home? What are our financial goals? What are we trying to do? Some couples say, yeah, I'm totally willing to sacrifice time with you during your prime earning years to go get it. We're good, right? So there's no consequence there, right? But if there is, hey, you're not helping enough around the house. Oh, I'm really stressed. Then that's something to look at. Does this make sense? Where we're kind of like individual case by case. Are there some cracks in that wall? Can you just patch them up? Or do you need to kind of like rebuild some stuff? And I think it's an individual kind of reflection. Again, honesty with yourself. How am I doing? We all absorb a certain level of stress at work, right? We sort of accept that as the norm. I do, right? I understand that I have to check emails on the weekend. I have to take calls. There are going to be times when I have to work longer hours. And my wife and I can kind of manage that to the extent in which that doesn't become an ongoing problem that then impacts the relationship.
That's really helpful. Let's walk through. So someone has taken that first step. Someone has looked themselves in the mirror. Someone has said, you know what, I need to talk to somebody. Somebody finds their way to you through word of mouth or through whatever. Walk me through what a win looks like. Walk me through, and I'm not talking about closing a deal. I'm talking about emotionally. I'm talking about, they've done a couple sessions and you're like, hey man, this is progress. Like, what does progress look like? What does a win look like?
Yeah.
What gets you excited in a patient? Walk me through that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the research in psychology shows in general, right, there are exceptions to this, but people can sort of expect change to have occurred within the first 6 to 8 sessions of therapy, right? Just because you go to therapy doesn't mean you're going to be locked in. I'm not putting you in a straitjacket and locking you in for 4 years where you're going to be seeing me twice a week. Yeah, except for Adam, of course. So 6 to 8 sessions. What are your goals, right? We outline the goals in the front end. I do a really thorough assessment, learn about people's I kind of lean the direction of like a lot of the patterns we take with us into adulthood were formed in childhood, right? That's like very kind of Freudian idea or like psychodynamic view. But that's a lot of the work I do with my clients, right? And we sort of look at like, why are you here? And sometimes it's an honest reflection, or sometimes it's someone coming up to them and saying, dude, you're off. You're my best friend. I work with you. You're drinking too much. Or I'm worried about you, man. You're like too stressed, right? And sometimes it takes that outside perspective for people to be like, oh shit, maybe I am, right? I've had employers bring their clients here, just like fix this dude, right? Because we need this guy to function better. So what a win looks like, again, individualized based on the goals. But a couple things I look for as a therapist, right? Number one, and like the big sort of easy answer here, Adam, is that, if this makes sense, the frequency, the duration, and the intensity of the issue that is bringing that client to therapy reduce over time. If that's anxiety, if that's conflict in a marriage, if I'm doing couples work, if that's drinking patterns, doesn't matter what I'm talking about, right? Does the intensity, the frequency, how often I'm doing it, and the duration, how long I'm doing it, do those things dissipate over time? That's like a very concrete sort of like KPI, to use like a business term, that we can look for. Another thing is like once clients start catching the pattern outside of this office, nothing lights up the dopamine center of my brain as a therapist more than a client saying, Ryan, I was last week, whatever situation, and I caught myself doing that old thing and I stopped it. Whoa, right? Like, we can talk here in this space, build insight, build reflection, but you got to go live your life, brother. You got to go implement these changes here. And as soon as clients can start doing that, I'm like, okay, we're really going somewhere here. And I tell every client, at some point, the goal of Ryan Wishart is to become obsolete, right? You're not going to need me anymore. You become your own therapist. You can manage those things on your own. Come back if you need some booster shots. And in general, that's sort of the path. Now, I have some clients that, and I joke with them, and they'll joke with me, therapy will end when one of us dies. Just because whatever brought them to therapy 4 or 5 years ago, that presenting problem has been dead and gone for 4 years. But Ryan, to this point earlier in the podcast, I have very few reflective spaces in my life. I'm a business owner. I am a this person. I'm a that person. And you know what? If once a week or once every 2 weeks or once a month, I have dedicated 50 minutes for somebody that I built a relationship with over time who really knows me and cares about me and gets me and probably knows more about me than, if we're honest, like almost anyone else in their lives in terms of old family patterns and difficult experiences. And if now we're at the maintenance thing I was talking about earlier. I'll just keep coming. Who cares? What's the downside there, right? And some clients will come for that short 6 to 8 sessions. I no longer want to have panic attacks. Help me with that. I got you, brother. You're done. Bye. Come back if you need me. And the other clients who are just going to keep staying for maintenance. And both are beautiful. Both are beautiful uses of therapy.
Well, and it sounds like it's almost a vulnerability outlet also, because
100%.
In my world, being vulnerable is not smiled upon.
Not cool.
Right. Yeah. It's you're supposed to, people are hiring you and agreeing to pay you, in many cases, a handsome sum for you to be the expert in the room on whatever thing. Like in my world, it's retail. Like I don't ask a lot of questions in these meetings, right? I offer advice, I offer solutions. And when I get home, there's not a lot of vulnerability, right? It's dad's here, fix the light bulb, play with the kid, fix the dinner, blah, blah, blah.
That's right.
Now, if my wife was listening, she would be like, you can't even screw in a light bulb, right?
Yeah, that's right.
She would take umbrage with that. But I think that this is probably a very cool, safe way for you to be vulnerable and know that that's okay. You're not going to lose a client because of that.
That's right. There is no risk other than your own ego. And that's, I think, Adam, at the end of the day, and this is my belief, this is why people go to therapy instead of just getting a self-help book. And self-help books are great. I've read 1 million. They work. They are good. But the fundamental difference of therapy is there's a relationship. Over time, Ryan Wishart gets to sneak behind the bodyguard. I get to sneak behind the ego, the defensive structure, the denial, the pride, the whatever, because I'm going to love you at some point if I work with you long enough, right? I'm going to be invested in you, and I want you to do better, right? And I genuinely love my clients. Not in an inappropriate way, in like a real human-to-human way. I mean, if I meet with somebody once a week for 5 years, yeah, man, I'm going to care about that person, right? I'm going to go through their ups and downs of their life. They get married. They get divorced. Their parent passes away. They have a miscarriage. They have this great work win. And to track people through life is such a unique, wonderful gift for me as a therapist. I mean, that's what keeps coming back. And I think this thing that we're talking about here is vulnerability, right? Is this idea that, and I'm not asking you to speak to this, Adam. I'll share for myself as a guy, as a business owner, as a whatever. It's insane for me to pretend that I don't have moments of doubt. It would be insane for me to think that sometimes I'm not full of shit. That I messed that up as a parent in that moment. I was not the best version of myself with my wife. Oh, that was not, maybe I messed that session up. Maybe I misread that couples therapy session and went down the road, right? And is there a space for me to reflect on that? And again, it can be for therapy. It can be alone. It can be with a spouse. It can be in prayer, meditation. Doesn't matter how we're doing it. But the fact that you guys have to be at that zone, right? I'm lifting my hand up a 10 out of 10, right? It is also insane to think that you're not a 4 out of 10 some days. Where some days you're I just don't have it. Or I'm intimidated. Or I'm scared. Or right? Very human things, right? And maybe there's a space for that here. It doesn't have to be here again. But I think that, you're talking about vulnerability and honesty, and that's, guys struggle with that, right?
So you've already been insanely generous with your time, and I hope people are listening to this and nodding their heads a little bit, whether they're in the car or they're on the treadmill or whatever. So I want to give you a couple just like quick answers. Walk me through. So your version of what ego is probably different than layman version of ego. When I think ego, I think like I like fast cars. Right?
Yeah.
I drive a
Like
shiny
narcissism or something.
Yeah. I drive a shiny freaking M car to work. Right.
Yeah.
And so that is.
I saw it pull in.
Yeah, that's like ego, right? Is that? But that's not ego. What you're saying? Like,
Yeah.
Walk me through like the clinical version of ego, so people understand what that means.
Think of ego as your bodyguard. Okay, so the ego is what shows up when I feel vulnerable, when I feel insecure, when I feel attacked. That's the version of Ryan Wishart that shows up. Now, ego can also mean who I show the world. I have a certain type of haircut. I drive a certain type of car. Whatever, that sort of aesthetics that exists, right? We got to be careful about that as all human beings, right? Because we all have sprinklings of narcissism. You know what I mean? We all want to be liked. We all want to be admired on some level, some more than others. So there is a piece to ego that is that. But the ego is the bodyguard that we sort of show the world, right? And by ego, I mean when I'm feeling insecure, when I feel doubt, that defense mechanism, that's what's kind of showing up there, right? But is that the real thing that's there, right? Or am I putting on a front? Is this an act? Is it a mask? Maybe not, right? But that's what we're talking about. We're talking about ego. It's kind of like what you present to the world when you feel insecure. You know, there's like a more complex psychological sort of thing, like Freudian, like ego, superego, id stuff. But at the end of the day, when I'm saying ego, that's what I mean. Who you're showing the world, what's showing up when you feel challenged. And sometimes it's beautiful and open and loving. And sometimes it's like an old pattern from childhood. I feel scared. I feel overwhelmed. I'm posturing right now. I'm deflecting. I refuse to take responsibility. I'm defensive. You know, like that. That's the kind of stuff we're trying to like get behind and do some work with.
That's awesome. So Ryan, tell people one parting shot, one thing that you want people to take away from this. If I'm sitting listening to this and I'm saying, nah, I'm too good for this, or I don't want to put words in your mouth. Just one last thing, kind of a parting shot that you want to leave people with about your business, about, you know, anything. You fill in the blank.
Yeah, well, this is a stolen thought that I'm going to share, right? Everything.
Most of the good ones are.
Man, nothing's original anymore, right?
Especially my business too.
Everything's, yeah. So this is a Richard Rohr thought, right? Who's like kind of like a Franciscan mystic. And his idea is that the ego, when unchecked, with Adam, with Ryan, if I'm not intentional, my ego will almost always go to the negative. I screwed that up. That person's out to get me. I hit that red light. I don't have enough money. My wife's mean. Like, if unchecked, our ego will, because that's protection, right? That's protecting us, right?
Back to the defense mechanism thing.
Perfect, right? And we need to intentionally and actively attach our ego by giving away our joy. By going out into the world, in your industry, in my industry, when we're at the checkout counter at Starbucks, when we're in traffic and we wave somebody in front of them, giving our joy away helps us train our ego to attach to joy, where we're not stuck in that black and white binary kind of this is good, this is bad. There's space between there, right? The other thing I tell almost all my clients, and I think this tickles a certain part of people's brains, because it's sort of like a weird brag in therapy or something like that. But I tell my clients, the most conscious person in a relationship is responsible for it. That's a kind of a Ram Dass quote, right? Who just passed away, one of my spiritual teachers. So if you're the person, and again, I'm not saying the person who's not in therapy is not working on themselves. Of course, I don't believe that. But I tell my clients often, like, if you see an issue in your relationship, in a friendship, in a work relationship, in a marriage, in your crazy parents, whatever, and you're aware of it, and you see the pattern, and you're the person actively engaged in self-improvement, I'm sorry it's not fair, but you become responsible for that. You become responsible for changing that. Now, you're not responsible for them, not in a codependent, gross way, but in terms of like, hey, man, if you see what's happening and you don't do anything about it, that's on you, right? You need to tweak that. You got to figure that out. So that's often another piece of advice I give a lot of my clients. Like, if you see it, you got to do something about it. Don't just sit back and say, oh, maybe my wife will notice this. Maybe my mom will get some insight when she's 70 that she's whatever. She's not. You got to do it, right? You got to set boundaries. You've got to improve the relationship. So those are like the two big things that I always kind of circle around in terms of themes in therapy, right? Intentionally give your joy away. Work on that ego is always going negative. And this other thing of like, a lot of things, I mean, the quality of our life is often based on the quality of our relationships. I'm a deep believer in that. We are only as good as the relationships that we have. Professional, personal, romantic, familial, whatever. Okay? And if you need to improve those and you see the cracks in the foundation, get out your spackle, brother, and start working. Like, that's on you because you see it. Does that make some sense?
Makes total sense. And it reminds me, there's some really intelligent people that I listen to, like Tony Robbins, or Gary Vaynerchuk. They always talk about gratitude, gratefulness. Like, it's so hard.
There's the joy part.
To be a dick when you're showing gratitude.
That's right.
And when you're feeling gratitude, and when you're really checking in with yourself and saying, yeah, I screwed up that last conference call, but man, when I get home, yeah, my kids are going to be excited to see me. Or man, look at this roof over my head. Or
Adam,
man,
that's right, man.
I'm here in America in 2020. I mean, there's a lot of things to be grateful for, and I think that what you just said kind of touches on it, giving away your joy, and if you allow yourself to feel gratitude, it's going to be really hard to screw up your day, I would think.
Oh, for sure. And that, I mean, just in my life, living my life, not that I'm the judge of psychological health or not, I'm not judging people as I go through my life. But one thing I notice, if I just interact with human beings and they actively just happen to express gratitude, there's this little part of my brain that's like, that person's got some shit figured out. Right? Like, that's a little clue for me that, like, that person's working on themselves a little bit. Right? Like, that's a cool thing, right? Because that is not natural.
Right.
That is not natural.
Right, and it's not prevalent. Ryan, this has been so much fun. I'm looking at the clock here. Do me a favor.
Yeah.
Tell people how they can connect with you, whether it's social, website, LinkedIn, email address. Tell people how they can connect with you.
Yeah. Well, I'm not really an active kind of person on those platforms. I'm sure I have a LinkedIn page that I haven't checked in many years.
He's a hermit.
He's a
digital hermit.
Something like that. I mean, I have a website. It's ryanwishart.com. Simple as that.
Spell it for people.
RyanWishart. Right? And .com. And I don't have a ton of stuff out there, blogs or reading materials or stuff, but I always let people know, if I could be a resource, even if it's not Ryan Wishart, right? If you're looking for a therapist, get with me next month maybe, because I'm all full right now. But happy to help you find the right fit. Know a lot of good people in town. And that's kind of, I wish I had a more kind of fun thing, like I had a blog or a podcast, Williams.
We don't need any more podcasters. I'm trying to corner the market.
I think you're doing a good job.
Well, thank you so much for being on. This is Adam Williams with Retail Redeveloped. I appreciate everybody that listened. Again, just kind of taking a second out of their normal kind of capitalism driven kind of stuff that we listen to and we put out there, and just taking a second and kind of looking inside instead of charging forward. I think this has been a lot of fun. I personally have learned. I've enjoyed the conversation. I'm going to go back and listen to it again. Check your ego at the door. Understand what it means. There's a lot of things there that resonate with me, and I'm sure with other people that do what I do.
Yeah.
So
want
to take a second and acknowledge you for taking time out of your day.
Honored, man.
To do that.
Yeah, go make your money, people, but just be kind. Right?
Sand off the edges.
Sand off the edges.
Sand off the edges before you show up at home. I think that's great advice.
You got it. Thanks a lot, Adam.
Thank you.